Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet this evening. I would also like to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. I'm speaking to you today from Gaya Michael country, and I particularly wish to extend my respects to First Nations persons who are deaf and hard of hearing. I'll begin with some quick introductions. My name is Fiona Graney. I'm a lawyer in Sydney. I volunteer as a director on the board of Aussie Deaf Kids. I was born with hearing, but I contracted encephalomeningitis when I was a baby and acquired a severe bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. I lost around 2/3 of my hearing. I was fitted with 2 behind the ear hearing aids for my 2nd birthday and have worn them ever since. There's no family history of deafness, so my entire family is hearing and my husband and children are also hearing. It is my absolute pleasure this evening to introduce the one and only fabulous Alex Jones. Alex Jones is an internationally admired deaf advocate. Alex was born in the United States, but he was recruited to Australia 25 years ago by the Australian Theatre of the Deaf. He had a starring role on the television series All Saints. He co-founded the company AI Media. He was director of the Cultural Festival for the Melbourne 2005 Deaf Olympics. He served as an ambassador for the Don't Diss My Ability campaign. And he also served as chairperson of the Deafness Forum of Australia. I am a huge fan of yours, Alex, and it is such a pleasure to be able to interview you this evening on the topic of deaf culture. Interestingly, on the Aussie Deaf Kids website, the deaf culture webpage is the most visited webpage, so we know that this is a topic that parents are interested in, and we have also sold out of tickets for this evening's events. I have a list of questions for Alex this evening. I will begin by asking Alex some personal questions. We will then compare and contrast deaf culture in Australia with deaf culture in the United States. We will have some time at the end for questions from our audience. Please type your questions into the chat and we will get to them at the end. We have a full house this evening with 100 participants registered. Please keep your videos off and microphones muted until the end. I would also like to clarify that although Alex and I did meet in the workplace, we are attending this webinar tonight in our personal capacities and any views shared are our own. So my first question, Alex, is can you explain what is a sign name? Do you have a sign name? Can you share it with us? Who gave it to you and how long have you had it?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, I would just like to also acknowledge the land on which I'm meeting you from. That's the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Thank you so much for having me here tonight to talk with you all. Excited to be here. I have an interesting sign name, and sign names themselves are very interesting. I actually have several sign names. I was born in America. My first sign name was given to me by my parents, who were also deaf. So this was my first sign name. This is the American A, and it was this here, Alex, on the left of my chest. So that was my sign name at home. And then I lived in Thailand as an exchange student for a period of time. They gave me a different sign name. They called me Lek, L-E-K, which means small. I was a small boy back then. It was a year 11 exchange program. So they gave me this sign name, Lek, and the L hand shape from my head. In high school, I was given a different sign name, AJ. And then when I lived in New York, the deaf people there gave me this sign name because I had blue eyes. So it was in reference to my eyes. So pointing to underneath my right eye. And that's been my sign name ever since my early 20s. So this is my sign name. And a sign name can be given to you based on some visual features. Like, for example, you might have a mole, or it might be personality based. It might be based on your hair. It might be initialized, so the P hand shape, or a variety of different reasons why sign names are given and a variety of features that you'll see as well across sign names.
Thank you, Alex. I love sign names. They're so fun and always have such interesting stories behind them. So Alex, when was your deafness diagnosed? Do you have hearing aids or a cochlear implant? And do you have a family history of deafness?
Yes, so both of my parents are deaf, as I mentioned just before. On my father's side, there's a significant amount of deaf people. So my parents weren't aware I was deaf. Back then, there was no early born screening tests that we have available now. So when I was about the age of 2.5, my mother was just observing me, watching me play in the backyard. And we have a swing set. And I was on the swing set and I was signing to myself. And my mother thought, hang on, that's not normal behavior for a hearing baby. I had an older brother, and then I was the third child. So my mother was like, no, I'm feeling like there's something different here. So she tried to test things. So she'd stand behind me and she wasn't too sure if I was feeling the noise or if I was hearing the noise. She would bang a pan behind me. I was very aware of what was happening in my environment, so I would often respond to some of those things. They took me for a hearing test. I think I was actually at the age of 3 that it was actually diagnosed, my deafness. But back then, in the old days, as we call it, the audiologist thought it was better to put a hearing aid on the most deaf ear. So I started wearing a hearing aid on my left ear, which was my more deaf ear. I love my hearing aid. I do use it and used it for a long time. Then when I had my first child, I realized, I thought I did a test on my right ear, and that was my more stronger ear actually. So I thought I'm going to get another hearing aid for my right ear. So now I wear hearing aids on both sides. I don't regularly wear them. Most of the time when I'm during the day at work, I wear them, but in the evening and the weekend, I take them off. I enjoy my peaceful moments where I can switch my ears off.
Oh, I absolutely relate to that. Can you tell me about your childhood and education? How did you find high school and university? Did you go to a deaf school or were you in a deaf unit?
Yeah, well, I've had a few different experiences over my schooling journey. Firstly, like any parent, my parents wanted me to go to my local school, like my brothers. My parents realized that the local school didn't have the best system that met my needs in terms of my communication needs. That was prep. My mother realized that it was best for me to go to a deaf unit, and I had to travel by bus to get there. They'd pick up other students on the way, whether they were deaf or other students with a disability. And it was in a mainstream school. I had great number, large size. I think there were 10 or 11 deaf students in my primary school. I wasn't too far from home. And that was my first experience there in primary school. There was a few different methods they used. Firstly, it was just oral. There was no sign language. Then it evolved into total communication, which is where you use signed English. So you use sign language that follows a speech or spoken language word order, as well as a spoken language. I went to Sweden when I was in year five it was. I went to Sweden for an international deaf camp for deaf kids, deaf youth. There are 4 children from a variety of different countries, so 11. This is in 1985. And I had a chance to meet other students that were the same age as me, that were deaf. And it was at that moment where I really felt like, wow, okay, I realized then I want to be in more of a deaf environment. I enjoyed being in that deaf environment at this camp. So when I came back home, I said to Mum, no, I don't want to go back to that mainstream school. I want to go to a deaf school. And my parents were a bit apprehensive about that. they knew deaf schools in terms of their educational outcomes. They aren't always that great, but I said, no, this is where I want to go. And sure enough, the education wasn't that good, but I enjoyed it. And I then said, no, I want to go to a different school, another deaf school for high school. It was a performing arts school in Washington, DC. And they had a campus. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Gallaudet University. There's a high school program at Gallaudet University, which is Model Secondary School for the Deaf, MSSD, so the Model Secondary School for Deaf. So I went there for 5 years. I lived there, I boarded there. It was a fantastic experience for me. Everyone communicated in American Sign Language. There was a big focus on making sure everything was accessible in ASL. It was a primary language that was used for your schooling. It was a fantastic experience. So that's my varied experience. I then went to NYU, New York University. I had a full-time interpreter, and that was amazing. It was amazing in terms of that access. I had a note taker as well, and both of those things really helped me a lot for my university studies.
That's great. Oh, I'm so envious. Wow. And Alex, are you married? Is your partner deaf? Does your partner know Auslan and or American Sign Language?
Yes, so I am married. My partner's name is Paul. We married 3 years ago. We've been together for 11 years. We're both co-parents. Well, I was a co-parent with another person, best friend of mine, Leonie Jackson. And I acknowledge her contribution as well to the community. She was the previous CEO of the Deaf Society. She unfortunately passed away 19 or 20 months ago now. We had 2 children. One was deaf and one was hearing. Both kids are wonderful. Eldest is 14 and the youngest is 11. Teenage years, wow, they're hard work. So my partner, Paul, is hearing. He learnt Auslan maybe 15 or 16 years ago. And that was through his best friend, whose cousin was deaf. And when he met them 16 years ago, he was like, wow. He was living in Newcastle at the time, in North New South Wales. And he said, I've got to learn this language. So he enrolled in TAFE and studied for almost 3 years to be able to communicate with his best friend's cousin. And it was then, I think about 7 years later, he met me at a dance party, and the rest is history.
Oh, that's
but
lovely.
Yes, he can sign. He's very knowledgeable about deaf culture, etc. I didn't have to teach him anything.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's very romantic. You were meant to be. Alex, can you tell me about deaf terminology? Can you explain the terms capital D deaf, lowercase deaf, and hard of hearing? And do you have any thoughts on the term hearing impaired?
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk about terminology. We live in a world where we pretty much label everything. We label people with impairments because of that medical model. And really, each individual person, everyone's on their own journey in terms of why they pick a particular identity or feel a connection to a certain identity. Growing up, I knew I had a hearing loss. I looked up to my parents, I looked at my brothers who were hearing, and I knew I was a bit different between my brothers, of them being hearing, me being deaf. My parents were deaf, and I wasn't too sure what I was or what I wanted to be. I wanted to be closer to my brothers. So I identified originally as hard of hearing. And my parents were like, no, Alex, you're deaf. And I said, no, I'm hard of hearing. And I wanted to operate and live closer to that hearing world. It wasn't until later on, I don't necessarily say I changed my identity, but I learned more about myself. and I became more proud about my deafness. And I would say then I identify with the capital D deaf at the age of 13. Look, I think each person is on their own journey, and it's up to each individual in terms of how they identify. Some people like hard of hearing, others call themselves deaf, but it might be a lowercase d. So what that means is they don't necessarily identify as culturally and linguistically deaf and a part of the deaf community. That's what capital D deaf refers to, those that use Auslan or use sign language, identify with deaf culture and are a part of the deaf community. The term hearing impaired is an interesting one for me because I guess it's a deficit model, or it's a deficit term in terms of the ear. And sometimes some deaf people do feel the terminology hearing impaired makes who they are sound negative. But in Australia, lots of government agencies use that term hearing impaired. It's quite pronounced and dominantly used in government communication here in Australia, more so than the rest of the world. When we look around the world and we look at different organizations, hard of hearing organization and deaf organizations do come together and agree on hard of hearing and deafness being the appropriate terminology. But again, it's each individual's choice, and no one should criticize anyone for what they choose to identify as.
Thank you, Alex. I find this a really interesting topic. I spent most of my life describing myself as hearing impaired and talking about my hearing loss. And I do wonder whether this deficit negative terminology has in some ways contributed to negative feelings of shame and self-stigma. These days, I prefer to go by lowercase deaf. I had a long conversation with my audiologist, the lovely Emma Van Wanroy at Pittwater Hearing, about whether it was misleading to call myself lowercase deaf when I do still have around 1/3 of my hearing. But she reassured me that without my hearing aids, I can't hear speech. I sleep through babies crying. I slept through a fire evacuation when I was at boarding school and woke to a firefighter shaking me. So she kind of reassured me, you can use the term deaf. You're pretty deaf, Fiona. But it's a hard one, and it can be hard to know what terminology to use yourself. So I'm glad that we got to kind of explore that topic. Can you talk to me about the concepts of ableism and audism?
Yeah, okay. So ableism generally refers to situations where people or society or systems oppress a person with a disability and treat them as unequal, so not equal to others because of their disability. Audism is another term that's related to that, but it focuses on those who can hear, and that those that can hear being better than a deaf person who can't hear. So ableism and audism audism falls under ableism, essentially. There are many ways people can be oppressed. We know racism, sexism, homophobia, those types of ways, systems, people, cultures might oppress certain people. Sometimes it's not necessarily apparent. It can be explicit, otherwise it can be implicit. And for example, it might be a conversation that's happening in the tea room, say at work, the water cooler chat, right? And people are laughing and I'm unsure what's being said. And I ask someone, oh, what was that conversation about? And the person says, oh, Alex, never mind. That you would consider audism and ableism as well. So not allowing someone to be a part of that conversation simply because of their disability or deafness. If it's, say, arriving to an event and you're not sure where the interpreter is and they say, oh, sorry, we actually didn't organise an interpreter. And they say, well, we've got captions. And I can be like, well, that's great. They set the captions up and I start watching it. And then I say, look, hang on, there's something going on here with the captions. And they say, well, no, we've got the auto captions on. rather than it being professionally captioned. And auto captions aren't accurate, as many of you would be aware. That would be considered a form of audism, where it's audist behavior to expect the deaf person just to put up with it and be grateful for the bare minimum. Audism isn't necessarily a term that's used a lot here in Australia. In America, it's used a lot, and they identify different types of experiences that deaf people have. Going back, when we think about not allowing deaf people to use sign language, that's audist behaviors in terms of not allowing someone's basic human rights. And similarly with ableism, if we think about trying to fix someone and make them normal, ableism also does mean you try to make a person normal. You normalize a person with a disability when in fact you don't need to. You don't need to fix them. You don't necessarily need any medical interventions. It's just who they are. So hopefully I'm explaining that clearly about those two concepts, Fiona.
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you, Alex. An example of audism that springs to my mind was the campaign a few years ago that a Victorian audiology clinic had with a sign of posters on buses that had the side profile of a woman pictured wearing prawns on her ears, and the caption was, "Hearing aids can be ugly." I remember having a strong reaction to that poster, and I didn't really have the words for it at the time, other than to explain that it was very offensive. I hope that over time in Australia, we will gain a better understanding of ableism and audism and ableist and audist assumptions in the same way that we have about racism, sexism, and ageism. Alex.
Yeah, and Fiona, one thing you just reminded me of actually was my eldest child, when they were born, 2 days after we had the nurse come in to do the testing of their hearing. And the person who did the test, you could see their facial expressions, them starting to react to what they were seeing come through as the results. And they were a bit unsure. You could see they were a bit afraid to talk to me about it. And they said, "Oh, your son needs to have a referral," and sort of always framing it in a way where they had failed the test. And that's a big sign of autism, where from the very start, that medical view of it being a bad thing, oh, the person's failed their hearing test. Well, they haven't failed it. They're just a bit different. We've got diversity in our community. Everyone has different lives. We've got wonderful people, wonderful, successful people, whether they're deaf or not. So yes, that's one that comes to mind for me as well.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, I think we have a long way to go in Australia towards just getting rid of that stigma around deafness. Can you share with me your experience of deaf culture in the United States?
Yeah, okay. Well, look, deaf culture, there are similarities around the world. America has a very strong deaf community, deaf culture based on the deaf schools. There's a lot of deaf schools in America. Almost all states have their own deaf school, and a large deaf community in America. I'd say 50 million deaf people in the US. Probably 60 or 70% of those are ASL users, American Sign Language users. There's a strong history and richness to deaf community events such as Homecoming, say, where all the alma maters come together and they have a big weekend, and they have the deaf elders, elderly deaf people there, high school students, primary school students, all in this one place. Lots of opportunities to observe deaf role models and celebrate deaf culture. Deaf culture in America has changed over the years, though. There used to be lots of deaf clubs back in the day, but now the community are more dispersed, use technology to connect rather than a physical space. And what we're seeing is it be more blended with the mainstream community, but there's lots of deaf sports gatherings, where the deaf community still feel that need to belong and come together. So events are still held, like those homecoming events, the football games, or sporting events, or whether it might be knitting events or big annual national deaf conferences where deaf people will get together. But here in Australia, it's obviously smaller. We do have some gatherings, but not a lot. Still, when deaf people meet, the deaf culture exists there. And if you go to a party, often you'll see deaf people gathering in the kitchen, funny enough, just because it's generally the most brightest place in a house. And that's a strong representation of deaf culture, because you'll see that happen no matter where a party is held. Growing up in America, I noticed there was a lot of storytelling as well, visual jokes, a lot of visual representation of stories that are passed on over the generations, that lore passed on through sign language. So my experience as a deaf culture really helped form my identity as well, of being a signing deaf person and seeing American Sign Language being used by so many people.
Amazing. I've never been to a deaf party. I'd love to go to one. You have to invite me to your next deaf party, please, Alex. I'd like to talk about the concepts of deaf gain and deaf pride. I was very excited to learn of these ideas last year. I grew up without any Auslan, and it was actually meeting and seeing you and our colleague Tennille Horton signing in the corridor of our workplace that prompted me to learn Auslan. I previously had no real exposure to Auslan. My parents had been advised by medical professionals to stay away from it. The fear was that it would make me lazy and that I would choose Auslan over speech. When I saw you and Tennille last year, I thought, wow, look at these two good-looking, intelligent, well-dressed professionals having an intellectually stimulating and humorous conversation in Auslan. I want to join that conversation. I do owe a debt of gratitude to Emeritus Professor Ron McCallum, AO. He was the Dean of Law while I studied law at the University of Sydney. He has been blind since birth, and he always took a special interest in students at the law faculty with disabilities. And for around 17 years, he gently encouraged me to learn Auslan. And I politely told him I was thinking about it, but that none of my friends or family signed, and I was already learning French. But after seeing you and Tennille, I finally enrolled in nighttime certificates 2 and 3 with the Deaf Society of New South Wales last year, and I have just loved the world that it has opened up. In particular, Deaf Gain focuses on, the benefits of being deaf. As a child, I had to wear my hearing aids every waking moment. And as an adult, I love pushing back and claiming my deaf time now whenever I can. So many noises are not pleasant to listen to, like traffic and motorbikes, sirens, dogs barking, cartoons blaring, my husband and kids nagging me. I crave peace and quiet. It feels like my natural state of being. I was also very touched to learn about deaf pride, in particular the celebration of deaf babies and the way that they are seen as a gift. Can you tell me about what deaf gain and deaf pride mean to you?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I have to say, Fiona, it's been beautiful to see you on your Auslan journey, being a part of the deaf community and understanding deaf culture and exploring your identity. I really admire your journey, and it's beautiful to watch. And it's so great when we can have some signed conversations like we did this morning. Your skills are wow, incredible. I'm in awe. And I want everyone to have that opportunity to access sign. So I think your journey is beautiful. So thanks for sharing that. For me, deaf gain is about not what you've lost. In terms of you losing your hearing, it's about, well, okay, me being deaf, what do I have in life? What have I gained by being deaf? And that's what that concept comes from. It's about flipping it on its head rather than looking at it in a deficit model, thinking about it in a positive mindset, and really promoting that positivity around deafness. And those that might say have acquired deafness late in life and be really unsure what their life is going to be like, trying to encourage them to focus on the positives in terms of what are they gaining. I can sleep and have a peaceful night's sleep. I don't need to worry about any noises waking me up. That's a gain, right? I can have a conversation with you, Fiona, in the office, and we can be on the other side of the office, 25 meters apart. We can have a conversation in Auslan. We don't need to get up out of our chairs and walk across the office. You might be in a car and someone in another car. You don't need to put the windows down and scream to each other. You can simply sign to each other at the traffic lights. Back in the day, my heydays, when I loved it, a late night party, I'd be communicating in the nightclub and people would be saying, "Oh, you're so lucky, the music's so loud, you guys can still have a conversation whilst the music's blaring." That's a gain, right? I think deaf gain's also about that cultural element as well, being proud of your deafness and being proud of who you are. And what you can contribute to the world and what you contribute in your life journey. And I think I feel really proud of my history. I'm really proud that I have a son who's a fourth generation deaf person in my family. So I feel really proud about that. I'm proud of who I am. And it's not about what we can't do, because yes, it's not just what we can't hear. We can do anything except not hear. And yes, maybe that's important to others who can hear. They think that, oh, it's a bad thing, but that's not the focus. The focus is on what we can do, and we can do everything except hear.
Thank you, Alex. I've been visiting my son's preschool and doing a little bit of Auslan with his class, which has just been so much fun. And my preschool age son hates rest time, where they all have to lie on a mat and they're not allowed to talk. So he told me that he was signing with his little friend on the mat. I thought that was a very cute example. It's sign language can be very useful in all sorts of places. Onto your Australian chapter, Alex. I know you were recruited to Australia by the Australian Theatre of the Deaf. How did you learn Auslan?
Yeah, well, I knew no Auslan when I first arrived here in Australia. Nothing. I knew the alphabet and that it was different to American Sign Language. It's all one-handed, A, B, C, D, whereas here it's two-handed alphabet. When I moved here, it was for work. Theatre of the Deaf contracted me to come out here. So I was performing 4 shows, and I sort of crash landed. It was like a crash course. I lived with some deaf people in a house, they were all using Auslan, and I was trying to take in as much as I could. And I had to know my lines for these performances. And I had 6 weeks to learn my lines in a completely different language. I had a fantastic people around me, like Caroline Conlon, and other deaf people around me, others like Colin Allen. I lived with him, who is a person who has beautiful language. So I was fortunate to be surrounded by deaf people who were able to help me acquire that language and try not to have any American Sign Language influence in my delivery of the show. It took me a good 12 to 18 months to be able to read back fingerspelling when a deaf person fingerspelled. So when I say read back, if I'm communicating with a deaf person and they're signing to me that they fingerspell something, I had to work really hard to try and understand what they were saying, because you almost fingerspell to yourself rather than the person that you're actually talking to. So I found that really challenging. I had to practice a lot. And what I would do is use the same trick, right? I do that now when I'm teaching Auslan to students. And this trick is, when I was on the train, when I would travel from home to the rehearsals, what I would do is look at the signs and I would try and fingerspell them myself. Every stop we stopped at, I would spell out that station, and try and become as fluent as I could. Fingerspelling's really hard. I found it really challenging. And across Australia, there are different dialects or particular signs that you might see more so in North Australia rather than South Australia, or the southern states of Australia. It took me a while to get used to it. But I would say, yeah, it took me a good 2 years to feel like, yeah, okay, I'm pretty fluent in the language, and I believe I'm fluent. But some of my friends do tease me from time to time that I come out with a random American accent in my Auslan. They tend to pick out that often. I'm pretty sure the interpreters would agree with that.
Do you have any favourite signs in Auslan?
Yeah, I did give that one thought actually. What I love about Australian Sign Language is there's less initialized signs. In America, there's so many initialized signs like M, P, R, L, like L for off a library. So this is a sign for library, whereas here there's a different sign that's not related to the English word. I prefer to fingerspell and use the two-handed alphabet rather than the one-handed alphabet in American Sign Language. For me, it just feels beautiful when your hands move together in unison. It's beautiful. It's tantalizing, just whereas one-handed alphabet just feels so, I don't know. It's just different. It's just different. And I notice here there's a lot of old traditional signs that are used. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh, I'm very glad to hear you say that, because I understand that often American deaf will tease Australians for having to use two hands because it's more convenient to only have one hand. You can FaceTime and that kind of thing. So I'm glad to hear that you think that it makes Auslan a richer language. How do you find deaf culture in Australia compared to America?
Yeah, I think there's deaf culture here, absolutely, in Australia. The deaf community is smaller, as I mentioned, and more dispersed across the country. When we think of sort of deaf clubs, they used to be in existence, but they've slowly shut over time. I think when the Australian Deaf Games are on, that happens every 4 years. You see 700 to 1,000, 1,200 deaf people get together to compete at Australian Deaf Games. Those events are really fantastic, and you see the culture celebrated. Over the last few years, naturally, that's been difficult for everybody, right? And many minority communities have found COVID really challenging, not being able to see people face to face. I think deaf culture still exists when and where, there are 2, 3, or 4 more. When there are 2 or 3 or 4 deaf people that get together, that's, deaf culture in living and breathing in amongst those people. I think deaf societies or deaf organizations where deaf people work and they organize certain events, that's where you see the culture really in its existence. I have deaf culture within me, but it's different here compared to Australia, America, just because of the numbers. It's so much smaller here, that's all.
What changes would you like to see to deaf culture in Australia?
I think what I would like to see happen in the future here in Australia, I guess, is the promotion of sign language and it being available for all families with children who are born deaf. I think the more role models as well that are available in the community that can represent what being deaf is like for families, I think it would be great for deaf children to know that there are other deaf children out there as well. And that their identity is really important, whether or not you have some form of hearing loss or what level of hearing loss. It's important to have those role models out there in the community that are visible. I think that's really important to me. And look, we've got a long way to go, I think, in the education space as well. Hopefully, that future is bright through our work at the Disability Royal Commission, Fiona, with some reforms and hopefully some positive changes in terms of early intervention services for families and as well in schools.
Do you think all children should learn Auslan?
Yeah, I do. I think what the difference is here compared to America is that anywhere I go in America, some people will know a little bit of sign language, whether it's simply, hi, how are you? Or thank you, what would you like? Whether that's in a restaurant, often people can sign. Most Americans know some sign language because it's introduced in the school system. Here in Australia, not many people do know sign language. Here in New South Wales, they've recently approved Auslan as a LOT offering, so they now can teach Auslan as a subject in schools, which is fantastic. We need more of this. I think it would be wonderful. I think we should celebrate this, and it'd be great for everybody to know some basic sign language just to communicate. And it goes so far when you meet someone and I can just communicate with them. It's a really lovely feeling. And it's really nice when people know some Auslan. So I think it would be wonderful if all schools could introduce some basic Auslan classes. I think that would be a benefit to everybody.
I agree. Do you have any favourite deaf books, TV series, or movies?
Yeah, well, recently, I'm sure some of you may have seen it as well, the Coda film that won some awards and the Oscars. How fantastic. I think it's a great film. The book that I'm currently reading right now is called Deaf Utopia, and the author is Niall DeMarco. I'll just show it to you, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm 3/4 of the way through. It's been a really enjoyable read so far about his journey as a deaf person. He's a bit younger than me, but it's interesting for me to compare his experience to my experience. And there's been some really impactful messages in there. Another one for those who may not know much about the deaf community, I really like reading this from time to time. Oliver Sacks, it's called Seeing Voices. It's a really good book. I've read it multiple times. And another one, there's a chapter, each chapter is written by different people with a disability. The author is Andrew Solomon, and it's called Far from the Tree. So yeah, that's another good book that I really enjoy. And some really great insights from a person who could hear and those that had never met a deaf person before. It was so interesting to read their perspectives. The other TV series that I saw a while ago that involves deaf characters is called Switched at Birth. So it's an old TV series. I'm not too sure where you can access that and where you can download it from, but they're probably the ones that come to mind in terms of those TV series, books and movies are related to deafness. But what about you, Fiona? Do you have any you would recommend?
Thank you. Well, I'm very excited to hear that Niall DeMarco has a book out. I didn't know that, and I have a huge crush on Niall DeMarco, so I will absolutely be ordering that like as soon as we end this Zoom call. And I know I agree with all of your suggestions. Coda was amazing. There's a very short film on YouTube called The Silent Child, which I found very moving. And for something a bit trashier, I did really enjoy the Deaf U series on Netflix. My husband and I just binged through that.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That's quite saucy, isn't it?
Yes. So my last question for you, Alex, is Aussie Deaf Kids is a charity that supports the parents and families of children who are deaf and hard of hearing. This includes parents who have just received a newborn diagnosis and those who are navigating the challenges of primary school and high school. Do you have any advice or messages of hope for these parents?
Well, I think Australia is a big country in itself, and I think there are different families that might live in different places, whether that's regionally, in metro locations. I think it does depend where you live, but I think it's important to reach out to the local community where there are deaf people around you that can help you navigate along your journey. I think we're very fortunate now with the NDIS and how that will allow more flexibility in terms of using your NDIS funds and packages to access deaf people that, or a similar person that has a hearing loss that or might be hard of hearing. And you can get some advice and some guidance from them. I think you can't underestimate that. It's difficult navigating this journey when you don't know anybody else who's deaf. It's a fantastic way for families when they're able to engage as well with other families or deaf people or both. I think I would really suggest that. I'm hoping one day we have a system where families can connect with other adults who also have a hearing loss or who are deaf or hard of hearing, so that they can easily connect with these people and form those relationships. Deafness is so varied. There are some children that are deaf that might also have a vision impairment. So it's good to be able to link in and talk to a deafblind person and find out what resources and support are available. We're really lucky with Aussie Deaf Kids as an organisation. Their website, their support, the links they give are fantastic. But we need a system where we can link families to people who have that lived experience and can really help families navigate that journey. And I think I want to say there's no right or wrong, but what's really important is that the child has access to a language. And by doing that, they can have access to both spoken English, written English, and sign language. If you can, great. If not, just make sure the child has access to that, because a lot of my deaf friends now as adults learnt Auslan later in life, and many of them share with me the reflection that they really missed out. And that tells me, I think we've really got to share that message that parents need to be open-minded and give children an opportunity. If they choose not to use it, fine. But if they choose to use it later on, wonderful. The fact that they actually had it. At the end of the day, when they take their hearing aids or implants off, they are deaf. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you so much for your time. It's been absolutely wonderful talking with you. I also wanted to say a big thank you to Anne Porter, the founder of Aussie Deaf Kids. Anne first started a Yahoo chat over 30 years ago when her own daughter's deafness was diagnosed. That Yahoo chat has evolved into a website, multiple Facebook groups, Instagram, and Aussie Deaf Kids has provided support to thousands of Australian families. So thank you, Anne, for your tireless advocacy and hard work over the years to support and inform the parents and families of children who are deaf and hard of hearing in Australia. I'll just check. I don't think we have any questions on the chat. If anybody would like to ask a question, we have a couple of minutes. But otherwise, that brings us to the end of tonight's session. So thank you, everybody. I can't see any questions. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
And I should just say, well, there is one question actually. Ask the name of that last book, Far from the Tree by Andrew Solomon. And each chapter of the book talks, there are different disabilities. They talk about dwarfism, or short statured rather, autism. It's an older book. It's through an American lens, but a good read.
Thank you. Great. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Well, have a great evening. Thanks, everyone, for your time. And that's the end of tonight's session.
Can you stay on for 1 sec, guys?
Yes, one person just said, my daughter is 2 and is desperate to have a sign name. Does it have to be given to you by a member of the deaf community? That's an interesting one, actually. usually deaf people do award a sign language. Usually, you know, it might be whether you meet a deaf person, have a conversation about it, and they might have a temporary sign name for a while. But yes, usually deaf people are given a name sign by another deaf person. But hey, there's no strict rules around that. So
you should share your sign name, Fiona.
Okay. I got a sign name last year. I was delighted to be given a sign name by my first Auslan tutor, which was Young Ju from Signpedia. And she visited my house to do some Auslan with my sons and me. And she was amused to see that I have a piano with some nursery rhymes, and I often play the piano and sing nursery rhymes to my long-suffering children. So my sign name is an F and then a piano. So yeah, it's Fiona, piano. The name of this, yes, the saucy Netflix show is Deaf You. It's very binge-worthy, so and trashy. I should. It's not highbrow, but very entertaining. Okay. Okay, there's one or two more questions actually. I'm just reading the comment from Nikki that says, I teach swimming and a parent was talking to me about her daughter being possibly selective mute. The mum doesn't want her to learn Auslan as she thinks it will prevent her from speaking. Yes, I'm so sad when I hear stories like this. That's the advice that my parents received, not to teach Auslan because they were worried that it would stop me from speaking. But surely we know now that, you know, we can speak multiple languages and it doesn't necessarily hinder your performance in one. I mean, you know, I'm so impressed by people that speak 7 or 8 languages, and yeah, so I don't, you know, we should be embracing bilingualism and just not saying that it has to be one or the other. This recording will be put on the Aussie Deaf Kids website in answer to that question. I really want my daughter to have access to deaf culture, but she only has a unilateral and mild moderate loss. Is that enough? Oh, of course. I've found the deaf community to be so very welcoming. I felt the same way with my hearing loss, like, oh, I'm not completely deaf. I still have some hearing. Is that enough? And when
Fiona, yes, and also I wanted to say, you know, hearing people who grow up as a part of the deaf community, they're a part of that culture and community. It's not just measured based on your level of hearing loss. When you're in the deaf community and deaf cultures alive and everyone's using sign language, that's deaf culture. It's not like, oh, hang on, what level of hearing loss do you have? Oh, no, you can't be a part of this. It's not about that at all. It's not unilateral, bilateral. It's nothing like that at all. So please don't worry.
There's another question. I wondered if you could share a little more about the benefits of deaf mentoring for children and parents. Alex, do you have experience with deaf mentoring? Because I have to say that that's not something that I had access to growing up, but I can only imagine that it would be very beneficial.
Yeah, I would say mentoring is so beneficial when you meet someone else that's like you as a young person. Often when I was traveling for the deaf theatre shows in the country and I met a deaf child, you could see their eyes light up. You know, it's that connection. It's really important. And the benefit is so immense of encouraging a deaf child or a hard of hearing child to see another adult that's like them. Often they're in environments where there's no one else that is like them, and that can make you feel a bit excluded. Whereas if you find someone that's a bit like you, it gives you a sense of pride, it gives you a sense of confidence. And that's why deaf mentors are really important. My eldest has an access to a deaf mentor. Even though we've got deaf family members and deaf friends, we still make sure they can access someone of a similar age and similar experience and have those opportunities. And there are experiences that deaf people can share with each other that other people can't really provide insights on. No one can give you that insights unless they have that lived experience. So there's such a benefit from providing those opportunities, and I would highly recommend it. Yeah. Oh, we've got lots coming through now, Fiona.
I know. We might. Yes, we're coming up to time as well, so we'll maybe just quickly tackle these. But then, if you have any other questions, then please feel free to reach out on Aussie Deaf Kids as well on the website or on the Facebook groups. We're happy to take any questions offline. So just quickly, there was a question about, can deaf children be selectively mute, and how can we support our children's deaf identity? I don't know the answer to the selectively mute question. And in terms of supporting our children's deaf identity, Alex, do you have any thoughts on that, being a parent of a deaf child?
Yeah, well, I think if a child has full hearing, but they are selectively mute and they might want to sign to communicate, I think that's fine. But in terms of deaf culture and deaf identity, that's an interesting one, because deafness, of course, relates to your hearing loss. So I'm not 100% sure either.
And supporting a child's deaf identity, Alex, with your experience of being a parent of a child with a deaf, how did you support their deaf identity?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. My parents taught me the way they were growing up in terms of their experience being in a deaf school. I had other role models around me, but I sort of shared that experience, my experience with my eldest child. But when it came to being able to explain what the hearing experience was like to my hearing siblings, I got those insights from my aunties and uncles. So it's just pointing out, I guess, where you go to for those perspectives. A deaf person can give you perspective on that deaf life. And I think I was able to manage because I could see how my parents managed every day, and how they would have different ways of communicating with people, whether it was communicating by writing down, say, for example. So I was able to better understand what I could do. And when we think about other children that are in families that don't have other deaf people, they need insights and opportunities to understand, okay, how do I operate as a deaf person? And you can get that through being exposed to other deaf and hard of hearing people.
Thank you, Alex. I think that's probably all we have time for this evening, but please do feel free to reach out. As I said, we're happy to take questions offline. Alex, was there anything else that you wanted to say before we finish up this evening?
No, yes. Just thank you so much for having me, Fiona. It was great to chat. Please send through any feedback. If anyone wants to make any contact with me, please do that through Anne. I'm more than happy. And I'm sure, Fiona, you're happy for people to contact you. But thanks for having me. Thanks, Fiona and Anne, and thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your night.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.